It's well past time to stop tiptoeing around the F word when it comes to Donald Trump. No, not the F word as in him, the stupid loser stain. F as in fascism. Because this is what fascism looks like. This is exactly what it looks like. Fascism. It's not fascism light, not fascism adjacent, leaning like or inspired by. It's fascism. And he's been telling us this is who he is and this is what he wants for years. And he's been able to convince a good chunk of the cult, if not all of it, to go along with this, to give away their ability to participate in democracy because they think a strong man is what they need when they have no idea what that actually means. They buy into it, and a lot of people on the other side hesitate to call it out for what it is. So we have to call it out for what it is every single day, because not doing that is how this shit takes hold. This is who Donald Trump is. Moreover, this is who Republicans are. Calling immigrants rapists, criminals, and drug dealers, making up stories about them eating pets, saying they have bad genes and that they will poison the blood of our country, othering them, demonizing them, and promising to round them up and deport them all by the tens of millions. These are the words of a fascist, threatening to execute your top general, suggesting using our military to arrest and imprison your political rivals, calling those on our soil who disagree with you the enemy within. These are the words of a fascist.
I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within, not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. By the way, totally destroying our country. The towns, the villages, they're being inundated. But I don't think they're the problem in terms of election day. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
Sowing distrust in government and institutions, attacking science, medicine, weather, and education, the free press. This is what fascists do. Lying about everything and anything, big and small, constant, unapologetic, unabashed lying, promoting, celebrating, and rewarding violence, propping up rule breakers and labeling those with a moral code as weak, rewriting, revising, and whitewashing history, erasing the truth of our very own eyes and ears. This is what fascists do, perpetually poking and prodding the people with the threats those people pose to all that they love and value. So much so that they must be stopped through whatever means necessary if they want to hold on to their wives, their jobs, their culture, their country. This is what fascists do. Gaslighting propaganda, flooding the zone with shit, promising to be a dictator on day one, erasing the line between church and state, galvanizing rage, having a disdain for human rights, suppressing dissenters, rejecting democracy in favor of a strong man, stoking rage against cultural elites and seeking revenge against them at the same time, promoting the idea of a superior national race based on bloodlines and a hierarchy of white male dominance. This is what Donald Trump promotes. This is who he is. This is fascism, and he is a fascist. That is what we're up against right now. Okay, so this week, something a little bit different from me. I don't even talk about politics once. Okay, that's not technically true. I sort of did talk about politics once, but just once. Anyway, this week with Halloween approaching, which is insane to me, I interviewed the co-authors of a book called The Witch's Door, Oddities and Tales from the Esoteric to the Extreme. There is a warning in this book, folks, and I'll just tell you there are some terrifying photographs, but it is absolutely fascinating about the collection of the macabre. This is a fun book. It's a really fun conversation, something definitely out of my usual lane, but nonetheless, one I really, really enjoyed, and I hope you do too. Just in time for Halloween. Welcome to the Are You Effing Kidding Me podcast. Ryan Matthew Cohn and Regina Rossi, co-authors of this incredible perfectly timed Halloween book. It's not a Halloween book, but it's timed perfectly for Halloween right now. The Witch's Door. Welcome, guys. We were just talking about how beautiful the book is physically, but welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to jump into this. We were just talking a little bit about like the word dingbat, because again, I was talking to you about how beautiful physically the book is. It has this incredible liner. And then you were saying we learned what a dingbat was, which is, I always thought as, as a kid, a dingbat was an insult, right? Like you're such a dingbat. But you pointed out that it is not, in fact, that's not the origin of the word.
Yeah, so in fact, a dingbat is actually the small detail that's within a book. Exactly what you're pointing at. So when you're calling someone a dingbat, you're actually calling them the small detail of an antiquarian book.
That's so cool. All right, let's talk about the inspiration for the book. I do love sort of the backstory of how you got your start, Ryan, because I mean, again, as a person, confessedly, I am so easily scared. I get freaked out by skulls and bones and all of that stuff. But you were not cut that way at all from a very early age, right?
I'm not cut that way. And I always say to people that are, like turned off by the image of a skull or, scared physically by the image of a skull or an actual skull, you got one inside of your head. Right next to your brain where you're thinking about how you're scared, you have an actual skull. And so I always find it kind of interesting because skulls and bones and skeletons live within us. And I think some people choose to confront them in a more artistic or aesthetic way. And then other people, I think, fear it because they associate it with death. And I think when we're talking about fears and being open to different things, it's more about being open to the idea of death, and possibly with having this imagery around us, or me, for a longer period of time, we accept it a little bit differently than your run-of-the-mill person.
Right, exactly. And you said in the book that your parents maybe thought you would be a doctor because you had this curiosity, and then that morphed into your artwork, et cetera. And then you could, the beginning of the book, you talk a lot about the origins of how this sort of, morphed for you and evolved for you. And then, now it's a part of your relationship. It's a part, it's your whole life. I mean, it's really interesting from a very early age to watch it get to where it is now.
Thank you. Yeah, it did start off as a bit of a, childhood obsession. I'd go like scourging, what's the word? Scourging for things in the forest. And, I'd bring them back and I'd merely make pieces of art out of them, or I'd collect them and put them on my little cabinet of curiosity shelf, real innocent stuff. And then at some point I realized that, there's other people interested in this field and that I could share it with others. And it more became, a business and a more major collection than anything else.
Yeah, and you said that you started collecting with baseball cards, something you don't even really enjoy, but you started with baseball cards and you had hundreds of thousands of baseball cards as a kid.
Yeah, it's funny. I detest sports to this day. I've never been to I was having a conversation with someone the other day. Never been to a baseball game. I was forced to go watch, like my brother play football. I don't get it. It's not my thing, and I'm not good at it, and I'll never excel in sports, nor do I want to witness it. But the baseball cards was interesting because it was my introduction into buying and selling. And I did that at a very early age where I bought a lot of pieces, a lot of cards, and then, took out the ones that I really liked for my personal collection and then sold the rest. And I was like, oh, cool. You can keep the really good stuff, but you can fund it by selling all the stuff that you don't care about as much, or your doubles or triples or whatever. And I still use those tactics today for business.
Just on a much bigger scale.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about that, but let's also talk about what was the impetus for the book? What made you decide right now that you two wanted to write the book together?
It's definitely a long time coming. We had been approached often over the last few years, but I think that most publishers thought that we'd want to come out with a coffee table book and just really show off the collection. But after talking with, our patrons from the Oddities flea markets and people that we work with, everyone is like, tell your stories, because you sort of gatekeep when you're collectors such as we are. And so we never really shared the details of what we actually do for a living. So we thought that was far more interesting for our first book.
We thought the stories might have a bit more longevity, and we would tense up anytime someone comes to us and says, hey, what do you do for a living? You're at a wedding or you're at a family function and someone goes, what do you guys do? I can't quite figure it out from your Instagram. And we would always like go, I don't know. We're on like a market and, you know, like we collect things and we sound crazy, you know, but when we had the ability to really spell it out in a book, it suddenly started to make sense. And now we're like, oh, what do we do? Just read the book. It's $30 on Amazon.
Right. Right. And in the warning, which is the very beginning of the book, you say you are about to enter a realm of the strange and unusual. The death positive compendium of oddities and curiosities you hold in your hands represents our lifelong fascination with the macabre and the bizarre. I think a death positive compendium, like, can you sort of unpack that for me a little bit?
Well, it's very much what I was saying earlier. Death positive means that you're accepting of death and you don't fear it. I don't fear death. I think that, you know, hopefully I don't get hit by a bus later on. I live in the country now, so it's unlikely, but I'm accepting of death. And, you know, the imagery of death and the idea of death doesn't scare me. I more celebrate life. And I think that sometimes looking at these objects, at least for myself, and I think Regina, it allows us to do that. So instead of fearing it, we're accepting of it. And I think that's kind of what death positive means.
Yeah.
They don't seem grotesque.
We also delve more into how different, I don't know, cultures celebrate death. And so memento mori is a big part of it. You can explain more. Memento
mori just means the Latin phrase that means remember you must die. And through centuries, you know, death has been represented in art. And that's all, like, at the end of the day, that's kind of what we do. We collect, you know, artifacts and we collect history. It just happens to focus on the subject of death. You know, you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I'd say a good 50% of the artwork has to do with death from different periods of time through the centuries. So it's nothing unique and it's nothing that rare. It's just that we as civilians, collectors, artists, whatever you want to call us, we collect it sort of in our free time.
It's interesting because I had a conversation with Adam Berry, who, you know, he does the ghost hunting and stuff. And he also has a book and he has a very similar approach in a way. The closer you are sort of to, it seems to me anyway, as an observer, the closer you are to something that focuses around this tangentially or directly, the less afraid of it people seem to be. You know, it's almost as if that when you break down those barriers and those walls, you can sort of see, like you're saying, both the history of it and the, you know, the cultural impacts and the different ways people have navigated it. It's part of life, obviously, but it is interesting.
Part of life, but
yeah,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but the truth of the matter is, it's the one thing, like, we should all be able to have a conversation about this because it's the one thing that every single person, every single animal, every single living thing has to accept the fact that they're going to die. It's an inevitable reality for all of us. And so I think instead of ignoring it, talk about it. And maybe some of these arts, these works of art can ignite a conversation about it and open up conversation.
Yeah. And how soon after you two met did you start having the conversations where this was something you enjoyed or would enjoy together? How did your journey as a couple and in this world evolve?
Yeah, because I was not a collector at all. When I met Ryan, I was working at Asian Provocateur. So, you know, I was playing in high-end panties and bras, very different. I think it was probably a good year into it. I had been in the fashion industry for 20 years at that point. I was getting burnt out and I was insanely jealous of what Ryan was always doing with his time. He would text me, oh, you know, so-and-so.
Hey, I'm in Paris.
Yeah, or Sean Lennon's over the house looking at artwork, or
oh my gosh.
You know, this musician wants to come over and have a house tour. And so
you were like playing hooky all the time.
Yes, I started calling out a lot. I'm like, no, that's not how I can end this career. And then it took me just a bit longer to test out the waters and take my knowledge of the business end of fashion and then apply it to what became the Oddities flea market, which of course I didn't know would be so successful. And now it's been my baby since 2017.
Wow.
And, you know, thousands of people that come together in some amazing historic location, and we curate the best of the best in the macabre field, from taxidermists to artists to jewelers to antiquity dealers. And it's is the coolest event ever.
Just to tie it into the book a little bit, though, I think it was really important, especially when we started to talk to Chronicle about doing this book, especially together, was to tell each individual chapter in both of our voices. So we're very different people. We happen to run this business together, and we both share, a general interest in this stuff. But it's really like, I'm one side of the equation and she's the other. And I think it was really great to be able to tell a story about how like I went and, bought a museum and how my mind worked when it came to the logistics of that and how I got excited about it. And then how Regina dealt with it in her way, because her take on it was completely different than me. I'm more passionate about it.
It comes out pretty humorous too, because it's the same story with two different perspectives, because we are not the same person, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of the lingerie business you were in before, one of your first experiences, if it wasn't like, I don't know if it was not maybe your first, but you went to a home where the artifacts were wrapped in the deceased gentleman's underwear.
Everyone loves that story.
It's a great story. It's very visceral. I mean, you can really imagine you just sort of like, oh, those tidy whities, and you said they were huge. Can you tell that story a little bit?
Yeah, they were this big. And you didn't want to insult this darling daughter who had just lost her father, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm thinking, yes, I'm used to picking up $500 Lever's lace panties, and now I'm picking up like
a dead man's overweight underwear.
Pains.
And so I think I felt like a certain responsibility to have to always like explain like, oh shit, like this is why I didn't really invite you to do these things, because you're in the trenches. Yes, you might be dealing with like the rarest artifact on earth, but you got to work to get it. And a lot of people in this day and age, they buy things online, so something just shows up and you put it on your shelf. But the true like artifact hunters like myself, I'll get on a plane tomorrow if nature calls.
We get our hands dirty. We've also seen many, many basements from around the world, and they're all creepy and dusty.
Every one of them.
Sometimes I walk down a flight of stairs and I'm like, this is it. This is how I die.
See, that's okay. So that's sort of a separate question, because I mean, in terms of not fearing death, I understand that. But are there still things? And I know, Ryan, you're afraid of the dark, right? Like, is that correct? Okay. So are there things that scare you that you encounter?
So there's not a lot of things that actually scare me. I'm very desensitized in my like lifetime of collecting and dealing in antiques. I've been to some of the strangest places on earth, and I don't even think about it. Like, it's just part of my everyday life. But yes, I'm a person that is not gothic enough. Like, I am sort of afraid of pitch black dark, and I'm extremely claustrophobic. I haven't been in an elevator in 30 years?
I mean, I've never been in an elevator with Ryan. Exactly.
So like when I worked for Discovery Channel, I'd have to trot up 26 flights of stairs. And it's just one thing that I do. When we lived in the city for 2 decades, or I lived in the city for 2 decades, I would just do it. But if you put me in like an elevator, probably just have a heart attack and die. Like I can't do it. Yeah. So there are eccentricities that everybody possesses. It's just funny because when you think about like what I do, you think like, oh, this guy's probably going in a cave or like a cavern.
No,
probably not.
I do all the harder stuff, believe it or not.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but like, other than the physical places for like collecting, have any of the artifacts ever in any way you've been like, oh, and I think there's a curse. One of them put a curse on you. Did you feel something ahead of time? Like, have any of them just kind of given you like, oh, I don't know about this one?
Yes and no.
I mean, for me, for sure. My house, 3 floors of artifacts. There are definitely certain rooms that I'm not a fan of, or there's certain items that I just don't want to look at. And I just, tell him to maybe move something out of my view. Oh God.
Let me just give you a sampling.
He's going to grab something.
Okay.
But not until those dolls that Ryan brought home did we ever really have any paranormal activity or really got the creeps. Like, come on.
Okay. For people listening and not watching, oh God, it's a terrifying clown. It's so scary. It's the clown from It. It looks like the clown from It. It's what do you
have to put it in front of me?
Okay, I can put it over
What's
here.
The story of that clown?
So, it's interesting. Sometimes something will have such like a grisly, almost like made for TV horror look to it.
Yeah.
But it has nothing more than that. It's an aesthetically creepy item, like this clown that I just showed you. This is a very creepy looking clown. Has it ever given me any kind of feeling? No, it's just a creepy clown. I don't even know what it was. It came as part of, like, in the story we talk about Nick Parmesan.
Yeah.
And this belonged to Nick Parmesan. And I don't know what it was, but it's a really cool piece. But then, you know, like, we've had dolls that really did something negative to us in our personal lives. And so we're always like, what do you say? Like, we skirt on caution. Is that the term?
Now we do.
Yeah. So we're just careful about the items that we bring into the house. You know, there's obvious things. You have to be careful with antique objects that you don't get things like bugs or like moths or something. And that could happen to anything that you bring in. But you don't usually think like, hey, if I bring this doll into the house, is it going to curse me or haunt my life?
So how do you think that does happen? How are some items conduits for that sort of thing? In your
I don't
opinion?
know. And I don't think we're the spokespeople to explain it.
Yeah, we're still questioning everything, even though we had like 2 weeks of terror over these dolls that, by the way, it really started once they were photographed for the book. That's why we added that story right at the end. The book was done.
Mm-hmm.
I think the book was written, but the publisher wanted to add it because it was sort of happening at the end. And we still don't really understand. And we've talked to a lot of our friends in the paranormal field, and they say if there's going to be anything haunted, it's usually going to be a puppet or a doll or something that looks lifelike, correct?
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, it does look like a life form. These two particular dolls that we're referring to are what are known as Charlie McCarthy dolls, and they were used by young people to practice the art of ventriloquism. Because, you know, before, like, everybody's watching TV and doing other things, we have cell phones now. People are playing with puppets for entertainment. We've come very far as a society. Back then, you're like, oh, hey, I'm Charlie McCarthy, or, you know, you put your voice in and you think like, oh, maybe one day little Tommy will become a ventriloquist. I think that was like a high-paying field or something. But the truth of the matter is, you're playing with a doll that talks almost on its own with, like, you know, a string, and then you put the voice in it. But I guess if you're really trying to come up with like a horror story, oh shit, the doll talks on its own, or it moves, or it inhabits like a life form.
Yeah. I mean, and we've seen that all throughout cinema and literature, and when they do that. And just as a side note, where I live in New Jersey, or I grew up in New Jersey, there's a place called Space Farms, and it's an animal museum / zoo thing. It's a very strange place. And they have in the museum, they have an entire floor that is just dolls. Just dolls, like as far as the eye can see, dolls, like layers and layers and layers of dolls. And some of those dolls give me but I have to go look at them, even though I'm not usually the kind of person who courts that sort of thing. I just have to go look at them whenever I go up there, because I'm like, oh, it's a whole floor of dolls, and you feel something you cannot escape when you go into that area, where you're just like, I don't know what this is. I can't explain it. There's something behind their eyes that just hits a little bit differently. But that's a pretty freaky place to go. If you're ever in New Jersey, Sussex County, it's worth the visit just to see the dolls.
Wow.
Well, there's a long-standing tradition of dolls being haunted, and there's a lot of evidence that certain dolls have been haunted over the years. And there, of course, there's movies like Annabelle that were based on a true story. There was an actual doll that was haunted and terrorizing people or a family. And then there's like Robert the doll in Florida, and that doll has also haunted numerous people over the years just by looking at it. And so I think that there's this story that lives along with the decrepit, patinaed antique doll. Are all dolls haunted? No, I don't think so. But I think you could also help manifest that by saying like, oh, this doll's really creepy, it's haunted.
Right. And then other people get that same vibes. Yeah. Let's talk about the Nick Parmesan collection. Let's talk about, because the title of the book is based on Nick's collection, right? So you mentioned that collectors like Nick are typically very private, which I think is a sort of interesting sort of side to this also. But yeah, tell us about Nick Parmesan.
You want to take Nick on?
No, you can.
You want me to take Nick on? Okay. Nick was this collector that we met at an art fair, an antique show. And he immediately was drawn to the types of things that I collect and at the time was selling. And so we just started a relationship, and he was a very intense guy. So I actually stopped doing business with him, despite the fact that he was spending like tens of thousands of dollars with me every month. I just couldn't deal with it. He was like a very obsessive compulsive person, and you could tell that he suffered from that condition. Later on, we ended up going to his house a few times, or I did rather. And the first time I went was this year. Go ahead, like 4 years. Stuff was to the ceiling. And it was like a lot of different types of things, mostly extremely rare antiques. When he passed away, his family basically had to figure out like how to get everything in this 4-story walk-up down the stairs and out, because the landlord wanted to rent the place out. He had been there for like 50 years or something.
Yeah, it was like a rental apartment. So they were pretty excited when that apartment was becoming available.
Yeah, he's probably paying like, $400 to live in most beautiful parts of Brooklyn. And so the deal was like, yes, we'll sell you this whole collection for X amount of dollars, but you got to take everything. And that was like everything from the dust on the floor to the rarest antique lamp that was hanging up on the ceiling. And so it took us a while. And through doing the research in that collection and really sifting through it took us like almost a year to do so. We found this door. And at first glance, it just looked like an antique door. We probably just figured it came out of a basement or whatever. But one day we actually found the paperwork that went along with it, and it read 17th century witch's door from New England. And then it said, the general provenance from the collector that it had come from previously, and then explained a little bit about the symbolism that was on the door. And then we knew we have this really incredibly rare artifact on our hands that we have to delve further into.
That's so cool. I mean, how did he get stuff like that up into his 4th floor walk-up apartment over those years?
I mean, we're pros at that. Having lived in Brooklyn forever, I mean, you just call up your best friends. In fact, he used to call you to help you get these items up the actual stairs. But then he didn't really let people come in because he definitely was hiding the fact that he was a hoarder.
Yeah.
I mean,
textbook.
Between all of the amazing objects he had, we were also dealing with some really gross things. And then what Ryan forgot to mention is that he had been a NYPD sergeant. And so we were also dealing with the fact that the police were calling the family to tell us that there were 2 guns that needed to be returned now that he was deceased. So we are cleaning out this apartment, but also looking for guns. Yeah.
Wow.
Which we do tell what happens because it took another couple of years to find those guns, and that's in the book as well.
Wow. And he had retired early because of 9/11. And was he a collector before then, or did the collecting start after then?
Yeah, he had started to collect. So, there's like people that collect literally everything. It could probably be like, belly button lint to the type of stuff that we collect, to very rare like Tiffany lamps. He was really interested in the earliest forms of cast iron cookware. And some of these pots and pans are worth, $20,000, $30,000 and upwards. I think there's some that are worth $100,000. And so that's what started him out, I believe, as a collector. So that's what he collected until he started to gravitate into the world of oddities. And that's where I came in. And his collection went from, 20, 30 pieces to 1,000 by the time he passed away.
And so when people get started sort of collecting, would you say that it's the curiosity in of this sort of things, these oddities, is it the curiosity that drives them, or is it the compulsion to collect things, and that sort of the joy that they get from finding things?
I think it varies.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I know for myself that myself and for others, sometimes like I think you have the love of collecting, and for some people I'll admit that I'm obsessive compulsive about my collecting because I focus on it. It's like a major part of my life, of my everyday life. But it starts usually with something that you find really interesting, and then as you're delving into the history of that object, you start becoming fascinated, and then suddenly all of your like
you want more.
Yeah, you want more, or you like want to learn more. And that leads to another object, which leads to another object, which means that you started to put together somewhat of a cohesive collection. And I think that's what happens. And then when you add obsessive compulsive disorder to it, then you go crazy. And like some people have these like little, cabinets that are just that's what they collect. And then other people have like the mess of a house that we have, where there's thousands of things.
I don't know when to stop, right?
Can't help it.
I mean, I get that with all sorts of things. I used to collect, this is so benign, but I used to collect Pez dispensers, and then it became a thing when I was young that I just needed to, everywhere I went, I had it. I do a little bit with magnets now, but are there still things, like obviously there are things, but are there things you're like, oh boy, would I love to be able to find that you're actively searching for, or people just kind of coming to you and being like, I have this thing, or I know someone who has this thing, and then you're like, oh, I'll go look at that. So it's probably a combination of both, but is there something out there that you're like, oh boy, that would be so great for our collection, wouldn't it?
Sure. Look, I'm looking for nothing. Pieces often find me, or a colleague will pass away, and then you get well, I say dreaded call from the widow, but that's my favorite call, because that means that something interesting is going to come through my hands. But I think you reach a certain point where you're oversaturated, or even like your brain can't handle anymore. And that's kind of where I am. I think
you evolved, because when we first met, it would be like one item at a time.
Oh yeah.
Now we look for whole collections at a time. So we're not just looking at 1 to 2 pieces. We're looking at 200 to 500 pieces at a time.
Right. And that's that mentality of the baseball cards. So instead of just buying one piece, well, if you're getting one piece and you really like it, you're not going to sell it. So then you just spent money on this one piece, and you're not returning on your investment until you do sell it. Most collectors don't want to sell things. If you buy 600 pieces, you can keep 5 things and sell the other, X amount of pieces. And so they make money, and then you can continue to go on. And so that's always been
how we always have capital, so we can keep doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's amazing. And you said, I think I saw an interview with you, but you said for some of us every day is Halloween. So as we're approaching Halloween, what is it that, do you both share that love of Halloween? No.
And that's why we laugh so hard at the Halloween thing, because I was born very strict Italian Catholic parents. They never allowed me to dress up. Therefore, even as an adult, I've never dressed up for Halloween.
And I feel like everyone's appropriating my Halloween culture, because like I do this every day. Why are you suddenly like putting bats, skulls, and skeletons all over your house?
Skeleton and insulting us.
Yeah, you can do this year round. You're doing a plastic one. I got a real one in the closet. So, it's funny, for the 11 years that we've been together, we've never celebrated.
Yeah, we sit home on Halloween.
Like this.
Yeah. And then we wait for children to come to our house. They never do. I think they're afraid of us. And so
Can I just tell you, we live in Westport, Connecticut, which is like this extremely wealthy, like right on the ocean.
Yeah.
All these famous notables live down the street. Like Phil Donahue ran this place, like Michael Bolton. And then we have like the dilapidated, creepy Victorian mansion on the hill. And I think kids look at it and they're like, God, that's too much.
We have a black chapel on our property, so I understand why.
Oh my gosh, but I'm shocked there's not the kids who will be like so curious and brave to go ringing your doorbell and be like, that's a book right in and of itself. Like your house and the brave little girl who is finally like, she breaks away from all her friends and she goes and sort of like rings your bell and you open it and she doesn't realize there's this incredible world where she can like engage with and learn. I mean, that's a book idea to follow this one up.
And then those people end up like following what we do. But I think about that scene in The Addams Family, and I believe it was the first movie, where I think the movie starts out with these kids go up to the Addams Family house, ring the doorbell, and then Lurch comes and says, "Happy Halloween" or something like that, and they all run in terror. And I think that's like what our house is. Yeah,
but you're adorable, so they would be like, "Oh, they're fine, guys. They're like normal, fine people." I mean, we have a house in town. It's sold. It's an old Victorian, and it was, again, scary. They actually had dolls hanging from the trees to this day. I don't know why, but the whole front, and everyone was terrified. And it was, again, in this town, it's a very Halloween friendly, trick-or-treating friendly town. And kids would like scurry by instead of going up and ringing the doorbell. But I think that's hysterical, because I think I've seen you interact with kids in different places, and you're great.
We love it.
We love them.
Yeah, and I love kids. Like, I love to ask children questions about some of these artifacts, because they tend to have the most intriguing questions. The other ones are a little bit more clinical, but kids, they don't need to like watch their filter. They can ask you literally anything, and they tend to ask the most thought-provoking questions from anyone that we've met so far.
Yeah, and that's why we do kids 10 and under free at the Oddities flea market, because we love when families bring children. All the vendors love talking to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and their minds are just open. You know what I mean? They don't have all of those preconceived notions and biases about stuff. And they're really just genuinely curious. All right. Well, I'm not going to tell kids to go to your house to trick or treat, but I would send my kids to your house to trick or treat. I'd be like, you guys got to go up there. As long as you're dark chocolate. No, nobody in my neighborhood does. I do, but
we love dark chocolate.
We don't eat candy anymore.
Well,
yeah.
On occasion.
Yeah, that's good. I'm not as tempted as my kids. I actually buy it early because all the good candy is only available till like the end of September. And then I bring it to it's crazy now. You can't get any of the good stuff. So I buy it really early. I bring it to my office and then I leave it here so my kids don't eat it all. And then I put it out on Halloween because we'll go through like 500 pieces in my neighborhood. But
yes, and we will go through 500 pieces if we leave it out. So that's why we don't eat candy.
Yeah. And I just appreciate all of the ways that you really make this stuff less scary and more approachable and fascinating and tell the origins of it. And it's really interesting in the history of it. It is really interesting for somebody like me, who, again, my daughter's like, Mom, why don't you put up scary Halloween decorations? And I'm like, I can't do that. So it's all happy and like charactery and like the skulls and stuff. I get very freaked out by it. But this helps a person like me engage with this stuff without being, totally freaked out all the time.
That's wonderful. And that's what we want to do. I think the more you know about something, or if you can ask someone that's a specialist in a field, maybe it's not as scary. If I tell you what something is, or if you ask a question about something in our collection that would otherwise be really freaky or have a dark history, it might make someone a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, and it's so important to read about what other people do for a living, right? We all don't choose the same path and we don't have to. We can, stay true to ourselves. And so this book is really for all those black sheep out there, because there's a lot of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that I love the shout out to the black sheep, because people can judge others by what they don't understand about what they do or who they seem to be on the surface. Again, your house is the perfect metaphor for that, because other people look at your house and they're like, that's scary. I don't want to go ring that doorbell. But these two wonderful people who are super curious and welcoming others and everyone else's differences are living inside there, guys. So judge a book by its cover in this case. This book you could judge by its cover, although the dolls, they're not on the cover.
No, we left them off out of fear of being haunted.
But there's a photo on the inside.
Yeah.
I think it's this one, right? Is it this one?
Oh God, that's them.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Get it out of here.
Sorry, it was a photo. Yeah. So, well, again, the book is The Witch's Door: Oddities and Tales from the Esoteric to the Extreme. Ryan Matthew Cohn and Regina M. Rossi. Thank you guys so much. It was such a pleasure to meet you, pleasure to talk to you, pleasure to understand a little bit more about what you do and breaking it all down right ahead of Halloween was perfect. So thank you so much for joining me, and congratulations and good luck. Best of luck with it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you both. Well, that concludes this episode of the Are You Effing Kidding Me podcast. I'm going to try and think of a spooky kind of introduction to make ahead of this. This will be airing. Clown is back. Okay, clowns. The clown from Poltergeist to this day, the clown from Poltergeist is one of the scariest. I mean, as a kid, nothing scared me more about that movie than the clown. Nothing scared me more about that movie than the clown. Not even the skulls in the pool, the clown. And obviously that was intentional. Oh, what the hell is that, a monkey? Oh God, it's taxidermy. Oh no, it's a taxidermy monkey. Why is it a monkey? Is he wearing a suit? What is?
Yep.
Oh God.
Unfortunately.
My dad's third wife, that's a weird sentence, but my dad's third wife had a thing for taxidermy.
Mm-hmm.
And when she moved into our house, they came with her, all of her pieces, and she had so many. But one was a wolf head or coyote and skin, and that was the back of the couch. So she would hang it over the couch so we'd sit and watch TV. The wolf head, but she had a snake, she had an armadillo, she did not have a monkey in a suit though. And it was like you come in at night, I forgot that was there. And but people really enjoy taxidermy. I'll never understand. I mean, I'm trying to understand it. I'm trying, but I'm traumatized a little bit because the rattlesnake would just look at you at night.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. But
and they're meant to look lifelike. So it's like, then you're living with a zoo, which is fun to like go visit. But when it's in your house, it can be a little freaky. Right when you walk into our house, if you look to the right, there is a giant hyena That's taxidermy.
I jump all the time.
I still do too.
Like, all the time.
And I'd actually just brought it down there to like take a picture of it for like Instagram, or like I found out that one of the people that I really admire has one. I was like, oh, I have one too. So like I took a picture to like, kind of like combat his taste.
Yeah. I wonder how big that club is. Maybe it's bigger than we know. The stuff taxidermy club.
The nerd dudes that collect big taxidermy hyenas. I think it's probably bigger than you might imagine.
There's a group for everyone out there.
Yeah, very true.
There's a person for everybody out there.
There is, and that's the thing too. Like that again, we obviously, not to make this about politics, but we live in very divisive times where people are not seeing each other for what makes them unique, and not seeing what they have in common. And conversations with people who don't necessarily look like you or act like you or collect the things you collect or find interesting. They're humans too, and they're people too, and we can actually find more in common than we think.
Agreed.
But, well, again, on that note, this was a great conversation. The book is fantastic. Everybody go out there and get it. It's everywhere, right? It's all everywhere you can buy books. Yep. Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you again. Best of luck, guys, and happy Halloween.
You too. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Have a good day.
You too.